Hey, everybody, and welcome once again to Nose in the Book, a Bible reading commentary with me, your host, Pastor Justin Van Reed. So great to have you with me as we take a look at 5 more chapters from the Word of God today. We have before us in our reading from 1 Chronicles chapters 24 and 25, from 1 Peter chapter 5, from Micah chapter 3, and from the Gospel of Luke chapter 12. If you have any questions or comments about these readings, please feel free to post those in the comments section below. Otherwise, let's take a look at what we've got. First Chronicles chapters 24 and 25 are similar to chapter 23 in that we're breaking down the Levites into their various families and clans and the role that they were responsible for. And so we have in chapter 24 first how the family here, the descendants of Aaron, the priests, are divided into groups for service according to the family lines. Um, Nadab and Abihu, of course, die before their father. They have no sons, so it's Eleazar and Ithamar who are left to carry on as priests. And so here, all the tasks we read are assigned to the various groups by means of sacred lots so that no preference would be shown. For it says there were many qualified officials serving God in the sanctuary from among the descendants of Eleazar and Ithamar. Um, and so all the names are written down. This is, from the perspective of the time of David, but also post-exilic, in that this is how the ongoing worship was to be conducted here, and the leadership, the priesthood, and the Levites. And so here you'll see that there are 24 divisions, and we know that Zechariah in the New Testament, the father of John the Baptist, we read in Luke chapter 1 that he is of the order of Abijah, which is listed as eighth here. And so he's, the same situation. There was 24 divisions, and so they would rotate who would serve 2 weeks out of the year, and so you had all the year covered. As it says, each group carried out its appointed duties in the house of the Lord according to the procedures established by their ancestor Aaron. And then you have the family leaders among the Levites that are listed. And then in chapter 25, kind of similar, but a little bit of a different focus, you have those who led the musical worship. And of course, you have the sons of Asaph here. And Asaph is very famous from David's time for leading worship in Israel. And then it says, all these men were under the direction of their fathers as they made music at the house of the Lord. Their responsibilities included the playing of cymbals, harps, and lyres at the house of God. Asaph, Jeduthun, and Heman reported directly to the king. And all three of those, by the way, are mentioned in the book of Psalms, as some Psalms are attributed to them. So it seems like these were the Psalms were used as Israel's worship book, if you will. Here we have a lot of musical terms that are listed in the Psalms as well, and talks a lot here about the use of musicians and the various instrumentation. And so here you have again 24 divisions among those family worship leaders. So that's what we have in chapter 24 and 25 of 1 Chronicles. A lot of ordering how Israel worshiped, particularly the tribe of Levi and then the priesthood within that. All right, let's go to the final chapter of 1 Peter here, 1 Peter chapter 5, and some closing remarks that Peter has for those he's writing to. He writes concerning first the elders in the churches, and says that that they should care, verse 2, care for the flock that God has entrusted to you, watch over it willingly, not grudgingly. Don't lord it over people who are assigned to your care, but lead them by your own good example. And when the great shepherd appears, you will receive a crown of never-ending glory and honor. And then the younger men in the congregation, it says, must accept the authority of the elders. And then all of you, right, elders towards the younger men, the young men towards the elders, dress yourselves in humility as you relate to one another. Clearly, Paul has the list in several places of qualifications for elders, and here you have this this qualification here, but it goes for everyone, of humility, counting others more important than yourselves. So he says, so humble yourselves under the mighty power of God, and at the right time he will lift you up in honor. Give all your worries and cares to God, for he cares about you. Watch out for the devil. Prowls around looking for someone to devour. Stand firm against him. Be strong in your faith. And then he says, I've written this short letter with the help of Silas, whom I commend you as a faithful brother. My purpose is to encourage you and assure you that you are experiencing, or what you are experiencing is truly part of God's grace for you. Stand firm in it. He says, your sister church here in Babylon, he calls the church in Rome, where he's writing from, Babylon, sends you greetings. So does my son Mark. Greet each other with a kiss of love. Peace to you all. So that's the end of First Peter. We come then to the prophet Micah. We're up to Micah chapter 3 here. And we have more judgment, this time specifically against the leaders in Israel. Listen, you leaders of Israel, you are supposed to know right from wrong, he says, but you're the very ones who hate good and love evil. So, the responsibility here on these leaders, the religious leaders of Israel, just as it was at the times of Jesus, leading the people astray. He says here, you eat my people's flesh, you strip off their skin, you break their bones. He says, the false prophets, right, speaking as though they're speaking for the Lord, but leading people astray. So he says, so judgment is going to come upon you. He says, darkness will cover you, putting an end to your predictions for the prophets, and you'll be put to shame. And so he says, verse 9, listen to me, you leaders of Israel. You hate justice and twist all that is right. You're building Jerusalem on a foundation of murder and corruption. You rulers make decisions based on bribes. You priests teach God's laws only for a price. You prophets won't prophesy unless you're paid, right? All of this, terrible. And so he says, because of you, Mount Zion will be, here's the judgment, plowed like an open field. Jerusalem will be reduced to ruins. Right? We saw it in the kingship in the book of Kings. We see it in, the prophets, false prophets that were being listened to, problems with the priesthood. So all the leaders of Israel leading the people astray. All right, then last we come to the Gospel of Luke and chapter 12. And, speaking here about the leaders leading the people astray, we have here a parallel in the first verse. Jesus warning his disciples, beware of the yeast of the Pharisees, of their hypocrisy. But he says, this is just great teaching here, to fear God, right? Not to fear man. Fear God who has the power to kill you and throw you into hell. He says, how much does God care for you? What is the price of 5 sparrows, 2 copper coins? Yet God does not forget a single one of them, and the very hairs of your head are all numbered. So he says, don't be afraid. You're more valuable to God than a whole flock of sparrows. And he says, everyone who acknowledges me here on earth, the Son of Man, will acknowledge in the presence of God's angels. So Jesus here is just teaching his disciples, right? Watch out for the religious leaders, but as you go forward in following me, don't fear. Don't be afraid of what anyone will do. Just commit yourself to me. Then you have the rest of the chapter here really focusing on, big chunk of it focusing on the dangers of wealth. Here's where we have the parable of the rich fool. He says, I'll tear down my barns and build bigger barns, and I'll say to myself, relax, take it easy, eat, drink, and be merry. But he says, you will die this very night, you fool. Then who will get everything you worked for? And he says, this is a person who's a fool because they store up wealth, earthly wealth, but do not have a rich relationship with God. And then he goes on here to talk about, don't worry about everyday life, right? Again, the focus, right? Not just like not fearing people, not worrying about stuff, money that you have, but to just keep the eyes focused on the Lord. He says, look at the lilies, how they grow. Don't be concerned about what you eat or drink, right? God knows, God cares, God will take care of it. So he says, don't be afraid, little flock, for it gives your Father great happiness to give you the kingdom. And then you have, the next section here talking about the Lord's coming and, how you're supposed to always be prepared, right? Not so worried about, the timing, try and map it all out, but, having a heart that is prepared for the coming of the Lord, which is sober-minded, always on the alert, walking and living in such a way that if God were to come, if Christ were to come, he'd say, okay, it's great, I'm ready. And, Peter's, asks, is this for us or for everyone? And, Jesus really says, that it's, for all the servants, for the master is going to come. All right, that's all we have time for today. Again, we had 1 Chronicles 24 and 25, 1 Peter chapter 5, Micah chapter 3, and the Gospel of Luke chapter 12. Hope you enjoy your time in the Lord's Word today. Until next time, keep your eyes on the Lord and your nose in the book.